I'm in London, and it's pouring with rain and a bit of a miserable Friday. But as we all know, no Friday is too miserable because at noon it's winning the writing game, and I really, really look forward to this. Any of you who watched Owen Colfer having a chat last week, we were treated halfway through to him having to answer the door to the postman. I think we actually got the postman on camera, so that was a bit of a unforgettable moment. So this week we have two fantastic women in conversation, and I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a really interesting week because hearing two writers talking is twice as good as one. So we're joined this week by Hazel Gaynor, who is award-winning, multi-award-winning New York Times, USA Today and Irish Times best-selling author. I'm sure many of you read her 2014 debut, The Girl Who Came Home, which was set on the Titanic. That won the 2015 Romantic Novelists Association Historical Novel of the Year. Was followed by A Memory of Violets, which was picked for the WHSmith Fresh Talent Award. And then The Girl from the Savoy, which was shortlisted in the 2016 Irish Book Awards, followed by The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, another shortlisting, this time for the 2019 Historical Writers Association Gold Crown Award. Hazel then wrote two books with Heather Webb, Last Christmas in Paris. This one actually won the 2018 Women Fiction Writers Association Star Award. And their second collaboration, Meet Me in Monaco, was shortlisted for this year's RNA Historical Novel of the Year. So it's a lot of books in a very short period of time. And her new historical novel, which is set in China during World War II, it's published here under the title The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, and in the US under the title When We Were Young and Brave. Hazel discovered last week, or maybe early this week, that it's been shortlisted in the this year's Irish Book Awards in the hotly contested popular fiction category. So it's going to be a pretty exciting rest of the year when we've got that to look forward to as well. So I'm going to bring Sam in now, and then Hazel. I'm going to disappear, listen, and I will come back at about 1:45 and put some of your questions to Hazel. But I'm really looking forward to this. Over to the two of you.
Hi there. That's great. That was a really good introduction. I don't know. So many awards. Hazel Gaynor. Hang on, let's bring you in.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, I want to know if she ever writes a book that isn't shortlisted for an award.
Yeah, I know.
Or win.
There we go. Now, just now, any second. Here she is. Wow. That was some introduction. I don't know. I did.
That was an amazing intro. Can Simon walk around with me and introduce me to people everywhere?
Oh, no, it's very good, isn't it? You'll have to take his little clip now, and then you'll be able to use it.
Fabulous. Yeah.
Good, isn't it? Hopefully everybody can see us and we're all sorted. Yeah. And obviously I'm in charge of technology now, so I have to be bringing in your book covers as we go along. So I'll just have
very clever.
I'll tell you, it's very sophisticated altogether.
I have strategically put a few behind me, you might notice.
Excellent. That whole shelf awareness thing is a big thing, isn't it, on people's Zooms now? Everybody having a look at inside your office. Mine looks great. Look amazing from behind, but you should see the rest of it.
We're just so nosy, aren't we? We just want to see what people have on their shelves. So
absolutely. Well, that's what being a writer is all about, isn't it? Basically, it's just being nosy. That's the fundamental basic, I think, of good writing. Hazel, you and I have known each other for a very long time. We go right back to a workshop, which I think was the day after you were made redundant originally.
Pretty much, yeah.
Straight after. So take us back to then and how your writing career started, and tell us a little bit about The Girl Who Came Home, which I'm going to pop into the stream now.
Gosh, yeah. So back in time to 2009, when life changed. I was no longer leaving the house every morning to work in a law firm in Dublin, and was at home with my two young boys. And you know, it's funny because I had always loved reading. I was a voracious reader as a child. And I think for most writers, you know, we're first and foremost readers. And I had dabbled in creative writing. I actually did an online course in children's writing when I lived in Australia for a year. So there was definitely something there within me. But I didn't know anybody in the industry. I had no family contacts in publishing. So it felt like a very remote possibility for me to ever know how to get published, let alone write a book that was worthy of being published. So I started by coming to one of your courses, and that was really me just exploring the routes into writing, and that was about writing on the web, about blogging. And I remember coming home and telling my husband, he was like, "You're going to write a what now?" This was terminology we didn't really know back then, which is amazing because it's not too far away. So I started to write a blog, really cataloguing my transition from being a corporate career woman to being a mom at home and the chaos and craziness of all of that. So I was known for a while as Hot Cross Mom. And that was where I feel like I did my writing apprenticeship, and I learned how to formulate my experiences and views of the world and have that confidence to press publish, because obviously you're inviting comment, you're inviting people to read what you think was moving or funny. And I think that really gave me the confidence to embark on writing a novel. And I did write a novel, getting up very early in the morning. And that's my under the bed novel that all writers have, that will never, ever see the light of day. It was not published, should never be
we all
published.
need one of those. It's important.
We all need one of those, yeah. And that was really about learning the discipline that's required to just sit there and write when you have no idea if anyone's ever going to read what you've written. And that novel really was my gateway into writing The Girl Who Came Home, which became my debut novel, initially self-published in 2012 to coincide with the centenary of the sinking of the Titanic, and subsequently taken for publication by HarperCollins 2 years later. So from 2009 to seeing the published book with HarperCollins in 2014, there were lots of sort of disappointments along the way, lots of, I suppose, taking a leap of faith in my writing. So it feels like a lot happened in those years, but then since then everything's happened in a rush. So we've lots of books that have happened since then.
Yeah, and it's an amazing story. It's an amazing launch story. I saw a quote on Facebook this morning, actually, that said, "Chance favours the prepared." And I just thought that's just so apt for today, because you were writing away, you had this book, you realised the Titanic anniversary was coming out and it really needed to get out there. And so you were prepared, but you were prepared. I mean, we can see from the cover that you did just an amazing job on that book. I mean, that ranked, well, I think one of the things about self-publishing is nobody actually looks at who publishes a book when they buy it. You know, it's the writing and the presentation and everything is what, people go for. And that book was read by 2 New York agents, wasn't it? Sold a shed load of copies first, and then 2 New York agents read it, and you were suddenly the person everybody wanted to talk to.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And I remember I literally wrote at my kitchen table at the time. And I remember I really believed in the story, and I still do believe in every single novel I write. And I think you have to have that passion. You have to have the belief that this is a story that other people will want to read. And I really felt that with The Girl Who Came Home. I didn't want to self-publish. I wanted the whole experience of a publishing house, an editor, everything that comes with that. And I remember saying to my husband, "Oh, well, sure, look, I may as well publish it because it's written now." I'd had it edited. I had a gorgeous cover designed. And I thought, if 100 people read it, that's better than it sitting on my laptop gathering dust.
Yeah.
And within a year, 100,000 people had read it. So it was a good decision.
It was.
But it's one of those things. And I think part of that decision also was almost clearing the way for me to get on and write the next book, A Memory of Violets, which I then hoped would get me the publishing deal. So it was almost letting go of my hopes in a way for The Girl Who Came Home so that I could write the next novel. And actually what happened, both books were read by those 2 agents in America, and subsequently were taken as a 2-book deal with HarperCollins. So the work I had done, and I love that quote you just said, and I think it doesn't come down to luck. I think luck is a very easy word to throw around. It really does come down to hard work and self-belief, because you don't know what's going to happen with any book when it's published, and you just have to have that confidence to do the best you absolutely can, inform yourself about how to do that, and then I believe hard work will reap rewards. So yeah, and it did.
Yeah, you're so right. I think that's. I was watching a TED talk the other day with a girl, a fabulous girl called Lovey, who has got a book coming out with Quercus, and she was talking about. She calls herself a professional troublemaker, and she was talking about facing fears and doing stuff, and that whenever she's faced her fears and actually gone forward to do something, great things have happened. And I think that's a bit like that with writing, isn't it? And it's this preparation thing. It's you just have to keep pushing at all the doors, and you just keep moving forwards, and it will come. But it's only going to come if you're ready and if you're prepared and you've done all that work.
That's it. And it's only over if you stop. I mean, I have a lovely collection of, I think it got up to 15 rejections from different publishing houses in the UK and Ireland before The Girl Who Came Home and A Memory of Violets were taken by HarperCollins. And of course, every writer gets to that point where you think, oh, is this ever going to happen? Somebody take a chance on me. And I always came back to, if I give up, if I stop, that's it, game over. Whereas if I keep trying, if I keep writing, maybe the next book will be the one. And actually what I've learned in the 8 books I've written since, obviously you have huge hopes for every book, and we all follow other authors and we see amazing things happening. And I think your aspirations naturally grow with each book, and you're not always going to have an Oprah Winfrey book club pick with every book. Every book isn't going to be optioned for a movie. That doesn't mean you stop believing and hoping. And I think self-doubt sort of sits on the shoulder of every writer, and you've just got to learn to shush that voice, really, and just be, have the faith in your idea, in your storytelling, and believe that it will find readers.
Yeah, I think that's pure gold. I mean, I think that's fantastic advice for anybody watching, but and also for us all just to live by, because I think you do, you have to push down the self-doubt. There's always that bit that thinks, oh, the books aren't good enough, or at every stage, and that happens to all writers, doesn't it? It's like I was posted up the other this morning, I think it was, because the dark room proofs are out there, and it's you've written a book, you've edited a book, everybody's looked at it, same with you, and it's a good book, or you hope it's a good book, but when it goes out, those proofs go out there, you're still like, oh my god, maybe everybody's going to guess the ending, or it's still that nervousness, isn't it? So you have to get a grip on that.
And you don't know, you sit with a book. I mean, I was writing Bird in the Bamboo Cage for 3 years in and around doing things with other books, and that was an incredibly daunting piece of history, location. I was really overwhelmed, and I wondered, could I do this? Could I do justice to this story and this piece of history? And several times along the way, I thought, what have I started? This is ridiculous. But you just have to commit to the idea. You have to put in the hours, do the work. And when a book is published, it's literally over to the readers. And of course, they're all going to like it, but you've got to hope that they will, and the reward when they do is incredible. But it doesn't get easier. I'm often asked, does that self-doubt get easier with each book because you've done it before and you've had readers love your books, so therefore is it easier? And it unfortunately not.
More worrying, if anything, because you think you're going to disappoint people then, don't you? But I
think it's like actors, they talk about having nerves, and nerves being necessary to perform at your best. And I feel that every time I set out to write a book. And if I was just sitting here, thinking I'm fabulous, I'm sure my books would be terrible, because it's that fear of response and reaction, and you need to work extra hard to get the book the best it can possibly be. So I think it's healthy.
Yeah, it's good. It's all good. It's so true. One of the things that you do in your books, which I think is one of the things that makes them really special, is that you really get into character, and you find somebody whose story is set against this grand backdrop, but it's not it's about the character, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about the Bamboo Cage for anybody who hasn't read it, and tell us about the characters in there, because literally every single one of your books features somebody amazing, but the Bird in the Bamboo Cage has 2 very special people in, doesn't it?
It does, and you're absolutely right. And I think, with historical fiction, the book really should be about character. It's about the story. We want to root for characters. We want to engage with them the same as any book. And what I try and do with all my novels is drill down to that human connection, the human emotion, regardless of the setting or the time period, so that we today can relate to that person. So in The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, this whole book was inspired by a true story of a group of school children and their teachers who collectively, they were at a school in northern China called Chifu School, and the school was occupied by the Japanese army following Pearl Harbor. And eventually the whole school were moved to an internment camp in northern China. And this was over 4 years of the war. And it's the most remarkable story of resilience and friendship, human connection. And that's what I found really fascinating, because war naturally is a very dark, difficult subject. And anything connected really with the Japanese army tends to be very dark, particularly. But this particular story, I think because it was populated by children, just was threaded through with these remarkable moments of kindness and hope. And it's a very different story of war because of that. So my story is told through two fictional characters, Nancy, who is a young 10-year-old girl in the school, and her teacher, Miss Kent, who we know as Elspeth. And it really is Nancy and Elspeth's story of how a child and an adult see the world so differently, and yet they're experiencing the same thing. And obviously the naivety and innocence of childhood contrasted with the adult's perspective of what's actually happening, and they're far more aware of the dangers. But really they tend to, they need each other to get through this. So just an amazing story of human connection, ordinary people thrown into extraordinary circumstances. And really that's what I try to do with all my novels, is find those human stories so we can relate to an event like the Second World War in China. I mean, enormous, distant event, and bring it much, much closer to our lives as mothers, parents, teachers, ex-brownie guides as I was.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel present and relatable to us now. And that's certainly the response I've had from readers.
Oh yeah, I mean, you definitely do that. I mean, and that's, I think, one of the big things, it's that relatability, because Nancy's in boarding school and she's missing her mum, and the letters are coming from home, and you manage to capture, first of all, you capture the voices of the period incredibly well, but also that mother-daughter relationship, or the parent-family relationship when children are away, is universal and transcends time, doesn't it? So I think we can all relate to that, and it's bringing that in that just makes this, so it's a heartbreaking, it's a happy book, it's a heartbreaking book, it's got all of those emotions in there. But talk to us a little bit about how you did the research for it, and how you got I always think of the BBC voices. And when I heard you talking about this, I did a degree in history, and my specialisation is the Second World War. I did a lot about the war in Europe. So when you said you were doing about the war in China and Japan, and Japan, and I was just thinking, my goodness me, does she even know?
Yeah, is she crazy?
Just like to get that flavour of the Orient and to bring in all that, it was just amazing. And you've managed to do that fantastically on the page. But talk to us about BBC voices, because I think that's the language of the time is something you've captured beautifully.
Thank you. And yeah, that's really something I feel is really important. And because a reader needs to be immersed, you have to pull a reader out of present life in any book, but I think particularly with a historical, and they have to, so it just becomes the place they're in. They're not sort of thinking, oh, I'm back in history. It's just they're immersed in the story. It was, as I said at the beginning, a really daunting prospect at the beginning. I first heard the story in a podcast called This American Life, and there's just this remarkable reaction to this different story of war. It wasn't the story of war in Europe that we know so well, and immediately as a storyteller, you sort of your signals go up and you think, oh, this is interesting. So I had to understand that period of history, the location. I'm fascinated by the attitudes of people in that period in the Second World War. This very strong, keep calm and carry on attitude, very resilient, very loath to self-pity. People didn't talk about, how do you feel? That just wasn't something somebody said to somebody else. So I listened actually to for some amazing Pathé newsreel, sort of BBC Overseas World Service broadcasts, which really do give you that way. It was received pronunciation was that, RP, as they call it, that classic, terribly, terribly. Yeah. So I listened to a lot of that. I looked at a lot of old newsreels, just to get a sense of that formality, that real sort of colonial empire spirit that this particular group, because it was a very privileged Western boarding school in China. So I needed to reflect all of that. But also, I didn't want the characters to be too sort of formal and distant, because we want to relate to them, as we've said. So what were the things that they were worried about on a day-to-day basis when the soldiers arrived? How did the teachers keep the children's spirits up? And actually, they did that by relying on their weekly meetings of girl guides and brownie guides, which gave them a way to control something when everything else was changing rapidly around them. So I did a lot of research in the archives of Chifu School at the University of London, where I got amazing detail about day-to-day school life. And that's what I feel is important. You sort of start with a big research about the Second World War and in China, the Japanese occupation of China. But then, to me, what's fascinating is when you read that the teachers, for example, had to grind eggshells and feed it to the children as a powder to help them get calcium in their diet. And, this is just amazing. This resilience, resourcefulness that these people showed, and the sense of humor that shone through in these dark, dark moments, and how the children in later life wrote about this experience and the sense of abandonment and separation from their parents, and how they formed these relationships with their teachers, who essentially became their parents as well. So there was an enormous amount of material, and really the skill then, I suppose, is to understand what to leave out of the book, as well as what to put in, because it's not a history lesson. It's I want people to be really rooting for Nancy and her friends Sprout and Mouse, and for Minnie and Elspeth, and just to be immersed in that world and in their turmoil, and how are they going to get out of this? How will it end? So just amazing detail.
It is the detail. I think it's that detail which you bring, which I think is the same for every writer, but particularly in historical fiction, and you do so well in all of the books. The Girl from Savoy, in The Girl from Savoy, there's a brilliant bit where some sheet music gets, I just love that scene, whisked away in the rain and stuff. I feel it's fixed in my head. But it's those little details which convey so much about character and the period, and make us feel like we're literally, as you say, immersed in the story and really, really living it. And there's lots of detail, and that's why you literally feel like you've stepped back in time when you read this book. It's fantastic, and it's a real achievement. No, it really is. I'm just going to show them the cover. Give me a second to do a little twiddle here. I'm going to show them the cover of the American edition, because it is, there we go. In America, it's called When We Were Young and Brave. And the link into the comments too, guys. So the link to Easton's for the first one, and this is the one for the American market. As you can see, the dollar sign at the top there. We're getting very technical here.
Multinational.
About the title change with the two books.
Yeah, so I feel like I've cheated. I feel like I've published two books when I've actually only written one, which is great. Yeah, I mean, often you find that different territories around the world will jacket a book differently. So, we'll have very different covers. But this is the first time I've had different titles, and it actually isn't that unusual. Often you'll see a book known as something for the UK market, Australia, New Zealand, and then differently for the North American market. So it really came down to, there were a couple of titles that were similar on either side, and just sense from the American, Canadian booksellers and from the market that this title, this jacket, would relate more to, or American readers would identify more with this cover and jacket, and the UK one. And it's funny actually how strongly each market has reacted to their version. So we definitely got it right.
Which is great.
Which is great. Yeah.
I always find it fascinating to see people's foreign covers, and particularly you can see titles change in different languages, can't you? Because obviously sometimes the titles just don't work when they're translated.
Yeah. So The Girl Who Came Home in Hungarian, the translation is Misty Memory Dots. which I think is rather lovely.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah,
Yeah. So, and Last Christmas in Paris in German is When the War is Over. So some are a literal translation. So the German, the girl from the Savoy is Das Mädchen aus dem Savoy. So it's the same, but it's amazing. And the Swedish ones I can't even pronounce. So I won't, I won't try.
Swedish readers to help us out with that. I think it's fascinating. It's a really interesting process. Just
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about your actual writing process in terms of, do you plot and plan these out, or do you do a draft? Just I can see you smiling there. I'm going to stop the covers over.
I'm laughing because at the moment I feel like I don't have a writing process at all. It's just everything's such chaos. So I actually was editing The Bird in the Bamboo Cage at the start of lockdown back in April, and it was just carnage because the kids were at home. I was trying to educate them. My husband was on 50,000 conference calls a day, and often aspiring writers will say, what are the conditions you need in order to write? I don't have peace and quiet. I'm like, welcome to my world. We can't exactly. You can never wait for the perfect conditions to write, because they'll never come. You've got to learn to write regardless, and just get something down, and you can always go back. And what we often talk about writing is really the rewriting anyway. So but my writing routine, when I have one, is I don't plot. I don't not plot at all, but I don't have a meticulous, fully formed plan, which is often terrifying. But for me, I get so excited. So when I discover a story like this that inspired The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, I just can't wait to start writing. And I find that I discover the characters as I'm writing them, and they start to make sense to me. And it's a very personal thing, and I no way is better or more correct than the other. But for me, the joy and the motivation to write is to see what they're going to do next, or how are they going to get out of this situation.
Wonderful.
And I feel personally, if I've already decided that, feels a bit more like hard work to then go and create that. So for me, it's much more organic. I generally have an idea of where I'm, which you'd like to think, where am I aiming for in the end? So for example, with this book, I knew there were distinct parts to the experience. There was the initial occupation of the school. There was then the internment camp. Then there was liberation. So there were very clear parts of the history. And then I knew I was going to interweave Nancy's story from an adult point of view, looking back. And then I just started to write, and it finds its own shape, and my characters become real as I'm writing them. And again, I have absolute admiration for anyone who can sit and have the discipline to plot. And I think I wish I could do that, because sometimes I get to the end of the scene and I'm like, all right, what next?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
But it's wonderful. It's wonderful that you trust the process, that it's going to come, and that the characters really do speak to you, don't they? I mean, we often talk about, sounds make us all sound completely and utterly bonkers, but this whole thing.
We are all bonkers.
Yeah. Joseph kind of talking at an event once about how he feels the characters float around in a cloud above your head, and they are, it's like they're looking for the writer to land on, and they sort of beam down to you. And I always feel that with your books, that's exactly what's happened. These people are out there somewhere, and you found them.
And that's a lovely thing to hear, because I really do feel, because oftentimes I'm writing about real people. So for example, the lighthouse keeper's daughter, I was telling Grace Darling's story, and I named her, and she was actually in the book. And similarly with The Cottingley Secret, Frances Griffiths, who took the photographs of fake fairies, I was telling her story. So there's a real sense of responsibility to do that properly. With something like The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, I've taken an experience and I've created fictional characters, which gives you a little bit more freedom. But yeah, I really do feel that it's important to get it right, because I'm telling this story, but this actually happened to people. And I think there's a sense of duty, of care to, sort of do that well and do that right. So, but I do, they float around me, and I often have visuals on my wall of people from the era, author, the exact person. For example, with Grace Darling, she was keeping an eye on me the whole time.
Watching you.
Yeah. I don't listen to music. I have to have silence, which isn't great when your whole family's at home.
So it's really interesting to hear how everybody, how your process works for you. And do you have like a set word count per day that you're aiming for, or do you just go with the flow?
Yeah, I try and have 1,500 to 2,000 when I'm drafting. So a first draft, I'll try and have around that as a daily word count. Some days it just works and you fly 3,000 words or more. And other days, life happens, school holidays, the word count drops. And I've learned to just accept that rather than get annoyed with it, and just go back to it when I can. And I always try and trick myself. I always say it's a 5-minute thing. So just write for 5 minutes, because often starting, that's actually the difficult thing, sitting in the chair. So if you say, I'll just write for 5 minutes and I'll try and get 100 words down, and you'll inevitably be still there an hour later.
I mean, that's genius. That's actual genius, because it's you're conning your subconscious, conning yourself. You actually, if you can sit down for 5 minutes and that's fine. I'm going to get off, do the hoovering or the washing or the other things.
So that kind of works for me, rather than sort of putting myself under pressure of you must write. And I don't use anything like Scrivener where I have a constant daily target sort of ticking down. I sort of do the best I can and reward myself with a gin and tonic at the end of it.
That's the most important thing.
And often my word count goes down because actually when you're rewriting, often what you need to do, actually the process of rewriting is often taking things out. So it can be a bit demoralizing if you see your word count dropping, when actually what you are moving forward because you're making the book better by losing words. But that's a really hard thing to. So I have an outtakes file. I never delete anything. I put things in an outtakes file just in case, and go back to it if I need to.
Yeah, and you did that a lot in the Bird in the Bamboo Cage, didn't you? You had there were bits you had to take out where you just had too much detail.
Yeah, and I tend to overwrite, so I tend to write more in my early drafts than is needed, and then it's a process of really trimming back and just I might have written a whole paragraph of prose or description, and actually it just needs a line, which is more powerful. But it's not easy to do, because obviously you think, I've 50,000 words less now than I started out with. But those 50,000 words you've lost were necessary to get to the point where you can go, that actually just needs to be a line.
Yeah, it's that distillation process, isn't it? It's like making gravy, where you're trying to, it's like richer and richer as it reduces.
There we go, folks. Books are like gravy. You heard it here.
Yeah, it's from the Woman Who Can't Cook.
Love it.
Like gravy making process isn't amazing. No, it's really interesting. And have you used you've used literally the same process, or it's been developing across the various books? Because what happens with the co-writing? How do you have to plan a bit more when you're writing with Heather, do you?
Yeah, well, so Heather and I, Heather's based in the States, and we came together. We have the same literary agent, and we debuted at the same time. So Michelle connected us because she felt we could both help each other on the other side of the pond. And out of that, we ended up working on an anthology together, and then we decided to co-write Last Christmas in Paris, which was just a fabulous experience and a real surprise bonus to both of our writing careers. So sort of every other year, as well as our solo books, we write a book together. So it's like half a book, and it's lovely to have that other person's point of view and opinion and words, so you don't have to write them all yourself. But we tend to plot a bit more because we have to figure out who's doing what. What we write in Google Docs, so it's like a live document while we're drafting, which we both touch every page. We tend to split the book by 2 characters, so we write a character each. But then we will edit the whole book together, and lots of chats and Google Hangouts. So that's a little bit more, dare I say it, organized, although it didn't feel like it when we were just finishing our edits a couple of weeks ago. It's been a difficult year. But yeah, we tend to have more of a chat about the shape of how are we going to co-write this book. So we need to have more of a sense of where we're going, because we're depending on each other.
Yeah, and do you write whoever's writing the first chapter do that first and then bat it over so you can see it and then write your point of view in the second chapter, or do you write two, running alongside each other?
No, it's very linear. So Last Christmas in Paris, for example, it's all written in letters between Evie and Tom. So I would be writing Evie's letter, and then there would be it's there for Heather to respond to as Tom.
Yeah.
We did the same with Sophie and James in Meet Me in Monaco. So we write a chapter so that the continuity is there. So we're telling the story in real time, if you like, as if we were writing it as one person. And that's been amazing. The feedback, people are always trying to guess who wrote who. But the feedback generally is it feels seamless, which is exactly how it should feel.
Which is
brilliant. It's just two names, two brains. We call each other our book wives because we spend so much time together now online.
It's really interesting because you've obviously got two different voices, writing voices, but if you're writing different characters, then that will come across as the character's voice as opposed to the writer's voice.
Yes,
and
exactly.
then when you do the edit, then you can join the bit together, can't you? I would imagine.
Yeah. So we're very, I suppose we're writing as we would tend to write in terms of the voice of the character. So I think you can tell a Heather character, and I think you can tell a Hazel character if you know us from our own book. But we do touch every page together as an editing process. Yeah, it's fabulous. We love it. It's such a joyful, happy thing that's come out of writing for both of us, and we've just said we'll keep doing it as long as we're having fun. So
yeah, it's great. It's great to be able to share the process and really enjoy it. I think that's one of the things about being a writer is that you are on your own a lot of the time with your characters, and that's gorgeous. It's lovely. It's lovely to be able to share it and bat around an idea and play.
I thought you were going to say with your cat, which is, I think all writers have to have a cat.
We do. It's Puffin, your cat, is it?
Puffin is my cat. Yeah, Puffin is often around, but I wouldn't be surprised if she bursts in. She tends to hear me on phone calls and Zoom chats and wants to be in on the action.
No, it's really interesting. And so when you're plotting out the first idea, who is it with Heather? Who is it that comes up with the idea, or do you just have a bank of ideas that you put together and then hash around to see which one you're going to tackle?
Yeah, in terms of the idea for the book or for how we write it then. So we do lots of brainstorming, and we'll sort of take each other's ideas and opinions. So what should happen in this scene? How will we develop that arc in that character? So, and we've learned through doing this to be more critical, I think, of our own work, because we're becoming editors of each other's work as well as of our own. And I think it really helps in our own writing. We've said from the beginning, there's no room for ego here. It's about the book. So if I think a scene Heather's written doesn't work, I need to tell her that, and she needs to be okay with that, and vice versa. So I think it's really helped in sort of stepping back a bit from my own work and not being Hazel who's just written it, but being Hazel Gaynor, the author, and actually asking myself, does that really, I know it's really pretty what you've just written, but does it actually need to be there? And that's the kill your darlings, isn't it, that we talk about. It's about having the confidence to take out something that you thought was fabulous when you wrote it last month, but on reread actually isn't as great or as relevant as you thought it would be. So it's been really helpful with Heather and I to sort of critique each other's writing, and then it helps to be a bit more critical, I suppose, in the right way of your own, and look at really what needs to be in the book.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about that process, and also to feel that you're learning the whole time, and that the exact process that you've brought to the bird in the bamboo cage. I'm going to pop it back in again so we can see this gorgeous cover, because that's what you were saying earlier about having
my matching teacup. Look at that
kingfisher on but that whole process, that critical process of overwriting and then knowing what to take out, because I think that's half the battle sometimes, isn't it? Knowing which bits need to come out. And it's probably experience that tells you that more than anything else.
I think it is experience, yeah. And I know I get asked a lot from writers, how do you know what needs to stay and what? And I think really the answer is just to give yourself a bit of distance from, we write, I hope, very sort of passionately in the first drafts, and really and this is something I took a long time to understand, that the first draft is really just finding the story. If you've plotted or not, you're still telling the story for the first time. When you've got that story down, that's when you can start to really look at it as a book. Is it pacey in the right places? Am I telling the story in the right order? Whose story is this? Maybe it becomes another character who's actually the creator of the story. And I think, as Stephen King says, write your first draft with the door closed and the door open. And it's about just giving yourself a little bit of space from that frenzy of trying to get the words down and then going, okay, I have a book. I always think when I've about 70,000 words, I think it's okay, I have a book. And I know some of those 70 will go and I'll add new, better words, but I know I have something to work with. And it's about then reading it as a reader and being really honest with yourself. Did I sort of nod off on chapter 8? Why did I start thinking about what's for tea? Because I've obviously lost the reader. So it's thinking about it that way. And sometimes reading a different font. Some people I know send their manuscript to Kindle, so they read it differently to their manuscript they're working on the screen. And little tips like that, changing the font size and typeface, can trick your mind to see it differently. Which all helps. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely pure gold advice, because it's that one of the problems we have is that your brain thinks it knows what's on the page and it sticks in the bits it thinks are there, and often they aren't at all. That's really, really useful. It's really interesting to hear about the process and how, and that it is that process of the distillation and right with the door closed, that really is what produces the book. And what I'm really interested in what you said there about maybe having to change the point of view of a character. So it feels like that first draft really is, because you aren't plotting out in detail, it really is an exploration of the story and finding out whose story it is, and giving yourself permission to change something as big as that is a really big thing. Like that is a
and we, even in the sort of towards the end of editing The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, the chapters that I intersperse as sort of a framework around the events happening in the Second World War, we meet Nancy as an adult, and the decision was taken. It just felt that we needed to read that in the present tense rather than past tense, because it was more current in her time frame. So little things like that can really change the feel of a book. And I've often changed third person point of view to first, or vice versa, just because on reread, once I now can stop worrying about, does enough happen? Is there enough action? What happens? Something has to happen. Have I told the story? Have I got a shape to the arc of the character? Then it's about what order is that in, and what point of view, and those things. So lots of, I've painstakingly gone through manuscripts and changed past tense to present tense, or vice versa, which I say I'll never ever do again, and I know I will.
It's fascinating. That is not being afraid of hard work, I think, is the message coming through there hugely. And we've had loads and loads of comments, and I haven't even looked at the questions. I'm going to bring Simon in now, and he's going to take us through something, because I think he was paying attention because I was busy chatting. So let me bring him in now this second. There we go. Hopefully he'll be with us in a second. But I think that bravery and that not being afraid of the hard work is just so, it's really good to hear. Bear in mind you're on deadline too, and that you have to get this thing in a certain, like, you don't have the luxury of spending, so Simon.
No, and I think that that's important, because when does a book ever truly end? And you've just got to get to a point where it's the best you can possibly make it, and then it's over to the readers. And it is hard work. It really is hard work, and it should be. Anything that's worthwhile is hard work.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Great. Really, really good.
Just start by saying it's just a real privilege listening to this, because I think your friendship comes across brilliantly, but actually the advice you're giving across, which you may not be aware of, I mean, Vanessa, you've used the phrase pure gold. I mean, there's just so many takeaways from this, and I can see that it's really hitting a nerve here in a really, really good way. So one question is, because you don't plot, do you then have to impose a 3-act structure onto your book when you're editing it? Or is that something that you're kind of just comes through anyway, because you've done it so many times?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm always sort of aware of the 3-act structure. But I haven't always followed that. And Memory Violets has about 7 acts, I think. I have 4 in The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, purely because there was that extra part of the story that needed to be told. So I think I would say, you know, don't be too hung up about having to fit into a 3-act structure. What you need to do is tell the story. And if that needs to be told in a 5-act structure or 4, but it's necessary and it still tells the story. You know, I wouldn't worry, certainly in the early stages, I wouldn't worry too much about that. It will become clear where you need to break events and parts of your story in subsequent rewrites, I feel. So yeah, I always have an idea of the end, because I think that's important. But I never allow myself to write the end. And I know some writers do, and they'll jump ahead and write the end. But I always think that's like my treat for getting there. So I make even if I know what that scene's going to be, I make myself wait until I can genuinely write it and write the end.
Yeah, it's interesting because a few weeks ago when we had Sophie Hannah on, and she was talking about her own books and the Agatha Christie ones, and she said the first thing she writes is the blurb that's going to go on the back of the book.
Yeah.
You know, and I think some people kind of need that structure, and other people enjoy the freedom. So when you're obviously you have this kind of, you're writing your own books and then you're co-writing books, as you've said. Has the discipline you've had to have with the co-written books, has that kind of infiltrated how you write on your own?
Yeah, I think actually they're really complementary, and oftentimes people think they would be distractions for each other, because they are very unique standalone books, all of them. But I think absolutely the discipline of knowing someone else is relying on you to contribute your scene or your chapter in order for them to have their working day, because Heather's obviously 5 hours behind me, so I need to get my hours in so that it's ready when she wakes up. And that discipline, absolutely. I'm actually very disciplined anyway. I mean, I've always approached my writing as a job.
Right.
I need to use the hours I have while the kids are at school to focus on my job. But definitely, I think the discipline of, as Vanessa said, having a deadline. You know, I don't have the luxury to tinker about with this for years and years and years. It's about working on that scene, that chapter, digging back into that piece of research, and eventually it gets done. But certainly, I think, yeah, it's really helped having that dual writing with Heather to focus the mind. You know, you just have to get on with it, and get the words down. And then you can relax, I think, a little bit when you're editing, because there's more rumination needed there, but certainly in drafting.
So your relationship to gin and tonic seems to have hit a nerve as well. But
gin and tonic go together. Yeah, exactly.
But it was funny, a few weeks ago, Catherine Ryan Howard was saying, you know, she always says, right, if I write 1,000 words today, I'm going to give myself a treat. And then she sits there for 5 minutes and goes, if I have the treat now, then I'm going to be more incentivized to go and do it. So I thought, but I don't think you should start the day with a gin and tonic.
No, what is it? Well, it wasn't Hemingway. I think he's attributed to the quote of "write drunk, edit sober," or is it the other way around? No, I think, but it's a really good point, and I think some sort of reward is really important, because a novel, if you start out thinking of 100,000 words, it seems impossible.
Yeah.
So and going back to the 3-act structure, I kind of break it down into 30,000 words.
Okay.
So when I get to 30,000 words, whether that's the end of part 1 or halfway into part 2, but I feel like I've written a third of a novel, and then I'm on my way. So I think breaking it down into manageable chunks. Write a scene. Don't always sit down to write the novel. Sit down to write the next scene, write the next chapter, and
brilliant.
It helps to make progress and forward momentum keep going.
When we talked to, I think it was Sam, you can jump in if I'm wrong, I think it was Adele Parks said that she could write the book in any order. She kind of
that was Kit.
Wow.
Oh, maybe it was Kit DeWall, actually. Yeah.
Kit was a massive fan. Yeah.
You'll storyboard it, and then, you know, if she goes to a party one night, if you can remember those days, you know, the next day she'll think, oh, there's a party scene later on, I think I'll write those. But I mean, clearly, because you're your writing process is an exploration, isn't it? You don't quite know where you're going, whereas I think a lot of other writers have a map at the beginning. But
Yeah, I do write a little bit out of sequence sometimes. So if I know, so for example, in The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, I knew the scene was coming where the whole school leave the school and they walked to the next location. And I'd read a lot about the attitude of the teachers encouraging the children to sing and smile, and they were neatly turned out. And I had that scene really clearly in my head. So when I got a bit stuck on an earlier scene, I jumped ahead because I needed to write some words that morning. So sometimes I'll keep the words by moving ahead a little bit. So I can do that. Yeah. So I know certain historical events in the time frame are coming, so I can jump ahead and then go back to fill in the emotional arc of how the characters got to that point.
And I mean, I loved listening to, you know, you've tracked down kind of newsreel and all that kind of thing. And, you know, YouTube is a writer's friend. I would have thought, particularly during the pandemic when you can't really go out. And have you found, I mean, you talked earlier about your Monaco book before we started the interview today, and you said, you know, you went and spent a week there, you know, in that area. Now, do you think that's going to, this sort of lockdown, it's going to impact what you're going to write next because you're not going to be able to travel?
Well, there's certainly no more trips to Monaco, so I'm glad we wrote that one.
Yeah.
So jealous.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly changes. I mean, even just going to London to the to the School of Oriental and African Studies to research the archives, and similarly, I went to the library at Leeds University to read Arthur Conan Doyle's letters that he wrote to Francis Griffiths in The Cottingley Secret. So, just I think it's almost about going to those, getting that primary source material in your hands, which as a historical novelist is really important.
Yeah.
But thank goodness. Well, thank goodness for YouTube and Google, but in other ways, what a distraction. So you have to have discipline there as well. But there are an enormous amounts of resources, and lots of museums now are doing virtual tours. And if you contact, I mean, the curators are amazing, the people who look after the archives, and you can often get screenshots of letters or of things. So if anyone listening is keen to write or explore a piece of history, you know, go to the people whose job and passion it is to curate that, because they cannot wait to tell you the fabulous things they have in their archives or show you something on a screen. But yeah, I think sort of glamorous trips to the Riviera are off for now. So
but I think you're right. I think in a way, like, if you can actually hold a historical document in your hand, there's something about the texture and even the smell, isn't there, which takes you back to another place.
It's amazing. And I was given letters that my great grandmother wrote to her son in the Second World War, who went missing in action and was actually never found. And that was also part of the inspiration to write this book, of separation, of loss, of how an event can disrupt an ordinary woman's life. And just to look at her writing and the words and how she expresses herself is incredible. Yeah, so it's a real privilege to dig around in those archive boxes. I feel huge responsibility when I've done that. Yeah.
And just I'm just going to interrupt you for a second, Sam, just to say here at this point, you actually, I find this incredible. It makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. But you got some letters from the kids who were in the school, the children who were in the school subsequent now, didn't you? Who read the book and
So after I'd published The Bird in the Bamboo Cage, I had an email come through my website from a lady called Lois, who said, "I've just read your book," and she said, "My brothers were both in one of the Chifu missionary schools in China and Malaysia, and they knew some of the children who were actually part of the period of the school history that I tell in the story." And I literally got goosebumps. It was very emotional. And the most amazing thing, one of her brothers then got in touch. He read the book and he said, "Thank you for telling our story." And I just couldn't ask for anything more, because you do feel very responsible, and to have made that connection was just amazing. So it's living history. I don't think historical novels are historical in some ways at all. This event is still going on. People are still living with the legacy of having been interned, and they have stories to tell, and to be part of that is amazing.
So we've been debating over the last few weeks about contemporary fiction and the fact that obviously writing a contemporary novel now, it's quite a challenge because
Yeah.
do we think anything set up to the end of 2019 is now classed as the historical novel?
Historical. It's a nightmare, isn't it? How do you
Yeah.
put people on a page? I'm never more grateful for writing events set years ago, because I can still have people actually touch each other.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's a real challenge.
But I mean, you talk about, you know, people are still living with the ramifications of what happened in the Second World War. And I think as a generation, surely the events of this year and who knows next they're going to trickle into the kind of fiction that comes out of it. So there's a question from Sarah who's asking about in historical fiction, is it better to use present tense or past tense? And I think that tense is something that a lot of writers starting out kind of wrestle with. Is that something just comes to you for each book?
Well, I've used both actually. So, and as I said, you know, often I'll change because it's what feels right when I reread it. Sometimes I feel present tense can actually bring a story closer, so it doesn't feel that it's happening in the past, because we're hearing about the characters' thoughts now in their. But it really can depend on how you're telling the story and what feels right. So I wouldn't say do one or do the other. Whatever feels right. And if feedback then subsequently comes that it doesn't work, be prepared to change it, and it will work, hopefully, in one way.
Another question is, obviously you self-published, and then the first book found a publisher with HarperCollins. Did you re-edit the book under the eyes of a editor, and how did it change your view of yourself as a storyteller?
Yeah, it was copy edited again, so we didn't go through a huge edit. I had the book edited before it was self-published. It was in really, really good shape, which was really important, and would never have self-published without that. But it was actually really encouraging as a new author that the copy editor at HarperCollins had very little to change. Now, I'm sure if I went back to that book now, I'd probably want to change a lot of it, because I think naturally, don't we want to get better, and we change our style slightly. But it was lightly copy edited before it was republished in paperback with HarperCollins. So, but that was the experience I always wanted. I always wanted to work with a professional editor. I have a fabulous relationship with my editor in the UK and in the US. And it's a real team effort, you know, and I think people can be afraid of being edited. I've talked to writers a lot and I don't want anyone to look at my work. They'll want to change it. They'll want to take things out. And I'm like, but yes, for all the right reasons. And they'll give you insight you can't possibly see as the owner of words, because we're just human beings and we're too close to what we've written. So bring it on. I want people to say, actually, you know, there's a gap here. It really slows down. And then we can create something brilliant together.
Do you have is there a kind of literary tick that you have that you try and stop yourself doing? You're kind of aware that oh no, I'm using those adverbs again. Is there something that you stop?
Oh, I have justs everywhere, just and very, and smile. I have to.
As long as you don't use super, that drives me mad.
No, I don't use super, but there are absolutely those words that we all use. So I have to go through, I have a notebook, and when I'm doing final edits, I have a notebook and I scribble down when I notice the veries and the justs, and then I was going to say I just do a search and replace. So absolutely, I'm broken. I can't not do it.
Very quickly take them out.
But when you're writing a book set in a particular era, let's say you're writing something set in the 20s or 30s or 40s, do you kind of read literature of that period, to contemporary novels of the period? So if you read P.G. Wodehouse, let's say, you get a real sense of a certain strata of society and the kind of language, don't you?
Yes, it can really help. And so, for example, when I was writing The Girl from the Savoy, I found a book that was written by somebody who worked as a manicurist, of all things, at the Savoy in the period my book was set. And it was just that sense of voice. And as I said earlier, that formality that was part of the past and how people connected and communicated. I tend not to read too much fiction when I'm writing, because you don't want your mind to be cluttered, but I'll dip in and out, and I think I'm naturally just drawn to historical novels as a reader anyway, so I'm often reading books set in another period of history that I might then come to write. So yeah, I'm naturally inquisitive about them all.
And I think we're unbelievably running out of time.
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it?
There's a question from D. Scallon here, and it's a nice question to end on. It's which of your books brings you the greatest joy?
Oh, that's a difficult question.
It's a lovely question, though, isn't it?
Well, it's a great question, and actually the answer changes, because the book that brings me the greatest joy is always the book I have just published.
Okay.
So at the moment, it's The Bird in the Bamboo Cage and When We Were Young and Brave, because readers are just discovering it. You're getting that amazing reaction from people who've just read Nancy and Elspeth's story, and they want to talk to you about it, and they have opinions, and it brings books to life in a way that they can't do without readers. So it's always the new book. And I think as part of that, I'll always have a great fondness for the book that started all of this for me. So The Girl Who Came Home will always have a really special place in my heart and on my shelf.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your generosity.
Thank you.
With us, and I hope we haven't depressed your word rate for today.
Well, there was no words being written today because I built it next in the kitchen.
But I mean, you're allowed to have a cheeky gin and tonic over lunch if you want. I think.
Oh, thank you very much. I might to toast my shortlisting this week. I think it's been a week of gin and tonic, so I'll have to stop at some stage maybe. But no, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for the questions and for everybody who listened.
Brilliant. Well, I think next week we're joined by Jeremy Dyson, who is one of the League of Gentlemen. He's written for TV, film, and fiction, and we're going to be having an interesting conversation about the relationship between narrative, screenplays, and spoken word. So that's going to be fun. That's next Friday at noon, and
yeah, it's great. Thank you so much, Hazel. It's so interesting. I think just one thing very quickly to end with is that historical fiction is a really good thing to read at the moment, because in this whole pandemic situation, we don't know what's going on. But with historical fiction, you know what happens at the end. You know, we came out okay. So it's a really great thing to be able to dip into and not feel, be feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the current situation. And guys, the links are in the comments, so you can pick up those books. The Bird and Bamboo Cage, if you are in UK, Ireland, Australia, or New Zealand, I think, and then When We Were Young and Brave in the States. The links are in there, and also The Girl Who Came Home. You can have a flurry of sales on that too, because that's a fantastic book. So thank you very, very much indeed, Hazel Gaynor. We're looking forward to Jeremy Dyson next week, and we look forward to seeing everybody here next week. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Thank you.